Hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And I'm Andrew.
Oh my god, we have a third person today. We have our very first guest. Did I say guest? I meant guest. Anyway, we have our very first guest. Thanks, Bruce.
Hey.
I'm contractually obligated to say that I've not been withheld in Bruce's basement for the past 6 months.
And I'm contractually obligated to say that I'm only allowed to podcast with Andrew.
It's true. This is going to be our one and only guest. Andrew, for any listeners that might not know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first off, I would like to thank you guys for having me on, because I love you guys. I love talking with you guys. I love talking about Commander with you guys. And so, if you guys don't know me, I'm Andrew. I go on a lot of the internet by my full name, which is Andrew Magrini. I've been playing Magic for a long time. I started in Visions back in '97.
Hell yeah.
I called it quits roughly about just before Kamigawa, and then I picked it back up, Scars of Mirrodin block, and I've been largely a Commander and Cube player ever since. So that's like the long and the short for me.
Yeah, Andrew and I, what is that? I think the first time we met was at a GP Worcester, I think.
Yeah, GP Worcestershire.
Yes, Worcestershire.
Worcester.
And we just sort of
Hit it off.
recognized that the other person was a pretty cool guy, and we wanted to spend more time together. And then Gen Con hit.
Yep.
And for those of you who've been reading way back on my stuff, during one of my articles, I talked about Gen Con, and I made a specific point of saying, if you're going to Gen Con, you need to get yourself a Magrini. And this has sort of been a running gag for Andrew and I now for years. It's just, Andrew had done Gen Con plenty, and I was just sort of following along, figuring how all this was going to work. And we stayed in the same room, stayed in the same bed.
Nice.
Just actually, for the record, I am Big Spoon in this scenario, but I'm also kind of like a backpack for Bruce. Like,
Yeah.
Bruce,
That's basically.
for those who don't know Bruce is like 6'5", and I am not. So there's your math.
Bruce told me the other day that he's 6'3". I went home and told my wife, I was like, Bruce is 6'3", and she was like, no way. He's definitely taller. So, you're taller.
Okay, so Bruce is 6'4".
Oh, sorry.
The doctor's office tells me that I'm 6'5". However, my son, who desperately wants to be taller than me, says that he is 6'4". And so I always tell him that, no, I'm taller than you, and I'm 6'4". Therefore, you are only 6'3", small fry.
So, Bruce is 7 foot even, and I met Magrini. I met you when?
I think at a BrewCon. Yeah, it was certainly a
like
BrewCon.
3 years ago. That's about it. I guess the rest is history.
Well, okay, so the whole reason we've got Andrew on here is he started doing this project, and it really piqued my interest. And this is a 10-deck story. This is a project that will be taking years,
decades,
to
millennial,
to go from start to finish.
Basically, yeah.
So the idea, well, what am I saying? Andrew, tell us about the project.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of context here just so people understand the reasoning and rationale for why it is I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So I came to the realization lately, and I think it's the discussion that we've been having in the Commander community for the last, I don't know, year, 2 years. We talk about the homogenization of the format. We talk about, how consistent building decks has become and how uninspiring that has been for me. And I came to the realization that a huge amount of the decks that I still pilot on a regular basis are upwards of 6, 8, close to 10 years old now.
Oh, wow.
There are some
Right.
that just they were the first thing I built, and aside from a couple of tweaks, and just based on the proliferation of materials from Wizards of the Coast right now, they have essentially become time capsules. I look at a deck from 2012, and maybe it was updated consistently for 4 or 5 years, but you can see there's a clear point in which it cuts off. And a lot of the newer decks I've been building, particularly in colors where I try not to have decks that are similar color wise. So just making sure everything has its place and its justification for investment and playing. And a lot of the newer stuff, I was trying to build in color combinations that weren't particularly inspiring to me. And then just the race to the bottom in terms of the efficiency of the cards we're now seeing across the colors. I want to say 70% of the deck was basically just pre-filled out from everything we're seeing in order to be competitive, or to be fun. I'm using air quotes for those that can't obviously see my hands. And so I said to myself, what is something I can do to try to build decks in colors that I find interesting, and B, how can I build those decks in a way that is not constrained by the templatization and the homogenization of Commander as it currently stands today? And so where that challenge netted me was this idea of, I call it the Diametrically Ravnican project. And I do that just to be, over the top in terms of
wordy,
over the top in terms of language. But essentially, I wanted to take what is the core definition, the core philosophical understanding of a Ravnican guild in Ravnica, because obviously blue-red can mean 10 different things nowadays depending on which set or world you're going to. And I focus specifically on Ravnica because those are the ones that we all know and love.
Right.
And I said to myself, what is the diametric opposite of that core understanding of this guild? And so that's how this project kind of started, and it's been a fun thought exercise to think about these guilds in a super critical way of what does this guild mean to me, and then trying to find a theme that is coherent enough to actually build a deck around that represents the antithesis of that thing. And so that's kind of how this all came together.
So the idea then is to take the homogeneity of a color pair and just try and find something that works in the reverse or on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and what I like about this format thus far, again, air quotes, this project is I can justify the use of what are typically considered efficient cards if they fit thematically within the theme that I'm going for. So it's not like Squid Tribal or People with Hats Tribal, where you're intentionally building for I don't want to say a meme, but you could be more mechanically interesting with this by finding ways of employing all of this stuff together. And so the one example that comes to mind for me that is pretty much common amongst most decks that include white is Path to Exile. And for the Selesnya deck that I've made, Selesnya for me represents bounty, it represents plentifulness for the many. And so the opposite, the diametric opposite for that was the notion of desolation, emptiness, the void, scavenging for scraps. And so for me, playing Path to Exile in there it's obviously a very efficient, very strong card from a commander standpoint, but thematically, the idea of banishment to this desolate nothingness feels apropos. And so it's like, it's fun to be able to play, within that kind of headspace of like, how far can I stretch open the aperture to like include cards that are less efficient but fit more on theme, but then also these decks actually be able to sit at a table with a couple of unknowns and have still a relatively solid play experience, even if the power levels have a bit of a delta between them.
I think we're no strangers to going too far in theme. I remember when I started playing Magic, I started playing back in, I think my first release was Dominaria. The Return to Ravnica sets were, like, I was still a new player when those were coming out. And I remember talking to somebody about, like, this, I've got this new green-black deck. I was like, I got this Golgari deck. And they were like, it's not really, like, it doesn't do the Golgari thing. And I'm like, all right.
Fair enough.
It's just, like, it's interesting to see, like, the color pairings are so ubiquitous in terms of, like, their names on Ravnica that it's a breath of fresh air to hear that, like, you're trying to kind of be like, look, there's more to it than Golgari means reanimation. Azorius is cops.
Yeah, what I used for Azorius, for instance, was, the crushing bureaucracy and seriousness of the guild. And so I went with my lovely little rabbit wizard Quain and decided to make a deck that was all about whimsical silliness. And I think the other key piece here to note for listeners is, Rule 0 aside, like, I have a firm irreverence for what's legal and what's not legal. As long as it's fun, we should be able to play it. And so 2 of the 4 decks that I've built thus far actually have a considerable amount of uncards included in them. And so, for instance, the Whimsy deck, like, it's got mechanically a lot of dice rolling, because that just feels fun to, leave things up to chance to some extent. But that leaves room for a lot of our interesting unstable cards. Because, like, here's the wild bit. Like, the thing that got me excited about putting uncards into these decks was reading a card like Steel Squirrel. And for those at home, Steel Squirrel is an artifact creature squirrel. It costs 2 mana for a 1/1, and it has 2 lines of text.
Value.
I believe, Bruce, keep me honest, I think 5 mana, you can roll a d6, but the important line of text is, whenever you roll a 5 or higher on a die roll, you add +X to the squirrel.
Until end of turn.
Until end of turn.
Counters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's not perpetual effect. They weren't that busted with it. But what's hilarious with this, and what's exciting about this, is the fact that it looks at all die rolls, so it's not just like one. So you could do multiple, and with the inclusion of rolling d20s, d8s, d12s in Adventures of the Forgotten Realms, this creature suddenly becomes terrifying to roll with a d20.
No, that's a big squirrel.
And so, there's that card, which was super fun and exciting to build around for this. And then the other one, which has actually now made it into 2 decks, is By Gnome Means. And By Gnome Means is a white enchantment for a white pip and 2 colorless mana. And it has 2 activated abilities.
So for 1 and a white, and remove a counter from permanent you control, so any permanent, and any counter, the ability is create a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. It's got a second line that says, for 1 and a white, sacrifice an artifact, choose any kind of counter a printed card refers to, then put 1 of that counter on target permanent.
Boom.
So there's a lot that, like, we could probably spend the rest of this video on this card alone, because any counter from any printed Magic card, and you can put it on any permanent, not just your own. So that's hilarious. And
Well, and then you pair it with the cards from Ikoria,
Right.
and now suddenly you've got flying tokens.
Yeah, because it's not. I mean, it doesn't say a printed card that you have in the game or
nope,
anything. So
you
you've
just
got-
need to know essentially all
Yeah.
of the potential tokens. Like you could put loyalty counter like in the rules on like Gatherer and the official Magic website. It says you could put loyalty counters on a creature. They won't do anything, but who knows? Maybe they will down the line. Like that's close to verbatim, but like it's just really funny that that's like the official rules text or Oracle rules text. Between Ikoria and a whole slew of other like sets that have just created proliferation of hilarious counters, as well as the ease in which you can generate artifacts to sacrifice.
Right.
Because obviously the conceit here is that you would leverage the gnomes that you are able to manufacture from removing the counters. But for instance, like I forget, Bruce, in our game, I spell swindled something and suddenly had 7 treasure. And it's like, cool. Essentially for 3 treasure, 2 to sacrifice for the mana, and 1 to sacrifice for the ability, I can
put an indestructible, put a hex proof.
Right. I essentially can turn any sort of dinky creature into a god killer. Which is what, in that game, I failed to recognize the attacking creature had menace. So that was the end of me, unfortunately. So like just being able to like just pump mana and treasure and artifacts into like creating, like I would love to see Quain just turn into this utterly horrifying, because you do have, for instance, like +2/+2 counters. They exist. Like, the old Magic was wild, and they haven't eroded it to be 2 +1/+1 counters. No, it's a +2/+2 counter. And then you could also use -1 or -1/-2 counters as removal. Like, there's the application is myriad for this card, and I love it. It gets use in my most recent deck, of which I actually have a couple cards here yet to be sleeved. It is my Orzhov deck. Ooh. And so the Orzhov deck is really fun because for me, the Church of Orzhova or the Bank of Orzhova, whatever you would like to call it.
The Church Bank.
Right, basically, yeah. Essentially, like, they handle the finances for the plane of Ravnica, or like they're the treasury, so to speak. If I'm getting this right, I'm sure some Vorthos will rightly castigate me at some point. But
yeah, their idea is money is power. So
right,
like,
so it's like they're the big four. Like they are the too big to fail bank of Ravnica. And so what is the diametric or antithetical opposite of that? It is startups. It is, innovation. And so how I built the Orzhov deck is Orzhov startups, and essentially it's run by Kambal, Consul of Allocation, who is the investor in
the startup.
The investor in this startup, and this is a contraption deck.
Oh,
so basically you are investing in this calamity machine. And of course, if you're familiar, I don't blame you if you're not familiar with contraptions, because it was a one-off thing.
Let's find one.
So contraptions are in their own deck, and they require a specific action in order to be created, and they actually get put on different sprockets, which you crank. And when you crank a sprocket, you can activate the abilities of any or all of the contraptions on that given sprocket. Now, what's really funny about contraptions, though, is while the deck exists in its own space, and they have their own graveyard, so they go to the scrap yard. They don't go to your graveyard, and you can't just they can't just come out of thin air. They have to be assembled.
Oh yeah, so like certain cards will say assemble a contraption.
Exactly, or
if you
reassemble
meet certain criteria.
Yeah. And but what's interesting about this is that while they have their own independent zones, they do when they exist and they're on the sprockets, they are on your battlefield. So they can be targeted, they can be sacrificed,
and they're artifacts.
And they're artifacts. So once again, by no means has hilarious application in this potentially, because it's like, oh, I could just convert this Garbo contraption that's doing nothing for me right now into an indestructible counter or a hexproof counter.
So like I think if any of our listeners are still unsure about these contraptions, they happen. You crank it when you're told to crank it, or is it at the beginning of your turn? I don't remember.
I believe it's your upkeep. You
okay,
move. Wait. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a contraption, move the crank counter to your next sprocket and crank any number of that sprocket's contraptions.
Yeah. Do you have all of them in your contraption deck, or do you have like specific ones?
So what they say for constructed, there's no rules on Commander, but what they have is just like a macro ruling on constructed formats. That states you need a minimum of 15 contraptions in your contraption deck.
That makes sense.
What I have right now is just an arbitrary 20, just to make it a rounded up number. And like, I haven't, I only have one-ofs. I think that's another rule that they have perhaps for Commander specifically is similar to your Commander deck, aside from basics, obviously, that you may only have a singleton or you can only have one of each card because it's a singleton format. So it's not like I'm gearing this deck up with like 4 of Sundering Fork, for instance,
right.
Or
like it's probably good that you don't have multiples, because you could just put one on each of your slots and then
just repeat it,
break the game.
Over.
Besides, if you've got the same thing on every crank, it virtually says that your startup is guaranteed. No startups are guaranteed. That's violently against the theme of the deck.
That's true. And also, by virtue of the fact we're discussing the utilization of contraptions in Commander, we are certainly not trying to optimize our decks by any means.
Yeah,
it's kind of inherent in the design of what we're trying to do in the first place.
Right. And I think like if you start to do that, like if you start to optimize your contraptions, like people are going to be like, no, I don't want to play with those.
Right.
Like,
the rules,
like,
it's going to be like, this is like a highly tuned contraption deck that's meant to just like, move me into the end game as quickly as possible. Again, like, it's an inherently janky type of mechanic because, like, if anything, you get an effect once every 4 turns.
Oh yeah, once around.
Right. So it's like it's not nearly as efficient when you only have one of each effect.
Yeah.
Right, and it definitely feels that the silver bordered rule of Commander, in that you can use silver bordered cards and people are generally going to be okay with that unless it makes it broken. So by no means is a great card and it's a lot of fun. However, you could easily set this up to make this busted, and then suddenly it's no fun and everybody's looking at you like, no, that card's got to go.
Yeah.
Well, and especially if you start to go down the path of optimization where it's like, I want to make sure every game I get by no means out by this turn, and I want to do X, Y, and Z things to these creatures to make them as oppressive as possible. So you start to, introduce tutors. Essentially, you go down that pathway of like, how do I make this thing do this one thing, which is intentionally what this is trying not to do.
Right.
It's
and if you've reached the point with your deck that you're tutoring for the silver bordered card, you've gone too far. Time to back it up.
I mean, kind of like with your Griselda deck, you're like, I'm just tutoring for BFM every time.
Here, like the fourth deck. So we talked about 3 of them. I talked about Selesnya Desolation, at least in the concept of what the deck is about. The last deck that I'll talk about, which is that I have built, and it was ironically the first one that kind of got me excited with this. So we kind of did one of these, or like this, like all over the place, as it is with me and my brain. But is my Boros deck, and like this was where it all started, because it's like Boros is just the militant do-good guy. Like it's just like, you know, the policing, you know, the militant, you know, being the do-gooder and protecting from the bad guys, and, you know, scandal, you know, protecting from, you know, the seedy underworld, you know, just thinking like that kind of stuff. And so for me, it was like, all right, so how do I make like an outlaw / scoundrel, like backdoor, back alley, like not even sinister, just like, you know, the way this deck came together is like, how do I make the equivalent of like a drunken tavern brawl between all of these questionable folks, and what are they all doing here in the first place? And so that deck is piloted by, the operation is run by, I think it's probably the better way to say it, Ragavan and Bruce Tarl. And I think actually, like, one of the big flavor wins in researching this deck and trying to figure out what the ideal combination or like commander would be for this is the fact that it is canon that both of these, and I'll pardon my French,
breaches.
Both. Oh, sorry. Did I say Ragavan?
You said Ragavan, yeah.
I said that card's expensive. Forget it. I meant breaches. Breaches and Bruce Tarl. They are both canon as being quite voluminous shit talkers. Like, they are all about taunting and, you know, just like talking smack in the fight and just like goading people on.
Just real hockey players.
Yeah, just y'all, just really getting in there, y'all. But so it's just like having, you know, like pirates and just brawlers, and, you know, like Robber of the Rich was a favorite for me. And this deck got really fun because it became a Boros deck that's not as inclined towards attacking, but it does like to steal a lot of stuff from other people. So it's like you make treasure, you make bets, you're stealing stuff off the top of people's decks and trying to cast them. So it fit flavorfully from a thematic standpoint, and also mechanically in terms of like what the deck is trying to do. Like,
right,
you know, there's a couple of new cards that I really loved for this. One of my favorite new cards from Modern Horizons 2 that I have up is Tavern Scoundrel.
Ooh.
And so this is a 1/3 human rogue for 1 red pip and a colorless mana, and it says whenever you win a coin flip, create 2 treasure tokens. And then the second line of text is for a colorless, tap and sack another permanent, flip a coin. So like, the only thing you're getting out of this is maybe treasure, but I did have a funny sequence, I think with us, when I was playing this, because I had what's the new white creature that you get creatures if you have less, and you get lands if you have less? Keeper of the Accord.
Keeper of the Accord.
Yeah.
And so essentially what I was doing in this game was I was pretty much on par lands wise with someone at the table, and what I would do is I would sack a land at the end step to essentially flip a coin to see if I net a free treasure, and then trigger Keeper of the Accord in order to get the land that I just sacrificed in replacement. So it was like almost like a no harm, no foul, just hilarious little interaction that, you know, doesn't necessarily, you know, it's a 50-50 shot maybe if it nets me an extra mana at some point down the line. But like, why not? Like, that's part of the fun.
I think it's interesting too that you bring up how your decks seem to be time capsules, because like, I know so many people who just kind of make a deck and then it sits there and like you play it and never change it, which has its benefits, and also you're not always worrying about, oh, I need to update it for the new set, which is so stressful for so many people.
Well, that only gets multiplied as you add decks to the quiver. Like,
Yeah.
if you have like, I probably have, with the inclusion of these new decks that I've put together in paper, I probably have like 10 to 12 again. But like, for folks that have 20, 30, 40 more decks, like, it is such a colossal exercise to try to, keep things up to date. And, especially as cards like just objectively get better and more optimized and just do more, like, it gets really tough because like there's like, and that's why like I just kind of I hit the eject button on that exercise. Like, I keep my cube up to date, but that's because like I only have 2 cubes, and that's far easy from
only 2 cubes.
Yeah, it's so much easier from a list. Yes, I know that's ridiculous to hear when I say it out loud, but like
I get it. I mean, they do different things.
Some folks have their kinks, and like, sure, I like to have a couple of commander decks, a couple of cubes. But it's so much easier to maintain 2 things on a monthly or quarterly basis versus 20. I'm not great at math, but I can tell you that one thing is easier to do than the other. Like,
oh yes, definitely. Especially with most cubes where they're generally singleton.
Right.
You don't need, like, oh my god, I need what's the red create treasure?
Oh, Dockside Extortionist.
Dockside Extortionist. I mean, people are ripping their hair out because they don't have one for every red deck they have, and it's like, I don't have one because no thanks. I mean, I would love one, but
I think I have accumulated 3, but I'm only using 2. One is just sitting in like my loose box for whenever. But like, there's an example of a creature in the Boros Outlaws deck that like super expensive, super powerful given the modern state of Magic, but it fits flavorfully into the deck, and it's not like, I'm going to drop Dockside Extortionist, I'm going to flicker it 12 times, and then I'm going to combo off. It's like, no, I'm probably going to sacrifice one of these to flip a coin to see if I can make more treasure.
that kind of like brings
Perfect.
That brings it to this point that I feel like I'm always bringing up in these episodes, where it's not about the cards that you put in the deck, it's how you use them. Like, so many people are like, oh, I'm not going to put this card in my deck because it's too powerful, or it's like not powerful enough. And it's like, well, if you use them the right way, it could be either. And I mean, it's the same with like kind of counters, where it's like, you could counter literally everything on the board all the time. But like, if you've got the counter in hand and you're seeing somebody is about to do something cool, it's going to be big, sure, but like, do you counter it? It's those moments of restraint that generally makes for a more memorable game, right?
Now, actually, it's funny that we're talking about this, because like, literally just the other night, I was discussing with another known associate, like, again, if you don't know me, the one thing to know about me is that Enchantress is my kink. Like, I will find a way to put Enchantress in every color. It's in my powered cube. My powered cube is warped to the point where like Enchantress is a viable format in a broken vintage level like format. And I was sitting there and I was saying to myself, like, what would be a fun, air quotes, fun scenario where I get to use Dress Down in broken ways?
Dress Down, 1 and a blue for an enchantment with flash. When Dress Down enters the battlefield, draw a card. Creatures lose all abilities, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Dress Down.
So this has some really funny applications. Like, right now it's seeing play in Legacy. I think at least Legacy, maybe Vintage, probably not, but at least Legacy, where folks are using this as a way to cheat in Phyrexian Dreadnoughts really easy.
Okay.
Of course.
But where this went with my head, in my brain, was I don't have an Esper deck, but I do love Enchantress. So if I wanted to do Esper Enchantress, not with Zur, because F Zur in the A, if I did an Esper Enchantress deck, like a funny scenario that I proposed to a known associate was casting Dress Down and cheating into play a Phage, the Untouchable.
Classic.
And then
the only way to play Phage is cheating.
Right. Basically, for folks at home, the card just says someone loses the game at some point, somehow, and that's all you need to know. And basically, what I want to do, because I've had this in my head since this card was printed, was casting Fractured Identity on my own Phage and just watching everyone simultaneously lose the game by receiving a copy of their own Phage.
Amazing. So
It's there's a lot of stuff on Phage. All you need to know is that at some point someone will lose the game.
amazing. That is beautiful. And like a lot of mana to like. Those are some big hoops to get through. Phage, I think, is 6. Fractured Identity is 5.
What? That's what I was saying. Like if you could reanimate Phage, if you could it doesn't matter how Phage gets into play once you have Dress Down live. So that's the fun bit of figuring that little puzzle out. And of course with having white in this, like you get some Enchantress effects. Like the one that really jumps out to me that I enjoy is Hall of Heliod's Generosity.
Love that card.
So basically, Volrath's Stronghold for enchantments. I probably just made that even more confusing for folks who don't know what the first
Academy
card is.
Ruins for enchantments.
Yeah, cool. It's it's all in the family. It's almost like they're trying to make a cycle of these. But so being able to have enchantments that die essentially, and being able to bring them back. So Dress Down, the bit of text on this that I forget is that this isn't a true humility effect. This is something that is only around for a hot second and then it leaves. So it's can you find ways to recur this and do it over and over? Once again, you're going to start cheating towards and optimizing towards that scenario, getting it off as consistently as you can, which bleh. But Dress Down is one of those cards I'm hot to trot. I'm trying to figure out what to do with, because it just seems really, really funny.
Yeah, that's so there's just so many applications for this card.
And it replaces itself, so it's not it's a cantrip, if nothing else.
Oh my god, I misread this card. It says creatures.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it said I thought it was an aura, and you. Amazing.
No, it's
amazing.
It's a global effect.
Holy shit! I thought this was an aura the whole time.
Oh no.
Well,
so yeah, it's okay.
Reading the card explains the card.
Somebody's gonna cheat in, let's say, not collect a company. What's the instant speed? Put a creature into play with convoke.
Yes.
I don't know. Court of Calling.
Court of Calling.
Court of Calling. Yeah. So it's
Quarter Calling.
Chord. CHORD.
Quarter Calling.
Chord of Calling is a green instant for 3 green mana and X, and it has also Convoke, which says your creatures can help cast a spell. Each creature you tap while casting the spell pays for a colorless or 1 mana of that creature's color. And so you can search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. And so a lot of times you'll just have somebody be like, cool, I'm going to Court of Calling in this Craterhoof, or I'm going to cheat in this creature, essentially is what this says. And
I'm going to go find it and put it directly onto the battlefield.
Right, and you could say, cool, that's cool. I'm going to, in response to your Court of Calling, play Dress Down. And your creature is just going to show up as a vanilla thing.
That's beautiful.
So it's just like if you're, it's secret tech for those that are in more competitive scenarios, because like if someone's going to wild pair, or somebody's going to Court of Calling, or somebody's going to cheat the thing in, like even just being able, like the Thassa's Oracle example, like you consultation for whatever, you exile your deck, you play Thassa's Oracle, and you win. Cool. But essentially, like the Oracle consultation combo can get mixed with this, because like person consultations, at that point that Oracle is going to hit the table at some point. So being able to respond in any of these moments prior to Oracle hitting the table, you can negate Oracle's ability to do the search and therefore win.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Also, being able to do this on someone's upkeep when they have a Lab Maniac out and they have nothing in their graveyard. It's like, no, I'm gonna say, like, do you have actually? It's a great question. Do you have a moment before? Oh yeah, you just do it in their upkeep, like, because Lab Maniac just checks for when you draw. So if you're just trying to win off your draw step, you just do this on their upkeep, and they either respond with something that cantrips or draws them a card, or they just lose.
Yeah, or even better, before they even untap.
Well, it's only... Well, does it... hold on, I need to pull...
Oh, it's...
That's the last bit of text is what gets you. It's not a...
Oh,
it's not
you do it during their end, the person before theirs end step.
Oh, and
because
it
it's
sticks
at the beginning
around
of the
the
end
fall.
step. Yeah.
Word.
Crazy.
Love it. Tech fruit.
And it's got some great art and a sexy name, so
I'm gonna dress you down.
I'm here for it.
So, Andrew, I wanted to ask a quick question. I want to go right back to the series that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. What's the next in the series?
Well, you and I, Bruce, actually, we discussed Izzet being a potential sore spot for people. And again, this is an exciting, I think it's exciting because it's like it forces you to think, less
outside
about
the bun.
Right. Yeah. what that Andrew said. So is it, like we talked to, let's brainstorm this live for a second. We talked about it a little bit. There's the experimentation, there's the science, there's the fearlessness aspect of just like trying whatever, and if it goes boom, it goes boom. Like it's for science.
Right.
So like there's a lot of interesting angles to potentially go this way. I didn't know, Bruce, if you had a chance to have a think about like what the opposite of Izzet to you was.
Well, I mean, I had talked about this as the careless science, and when we were talking, your response was the idea of the opposite of Izzet is like prudence or caution, and that rang a bell for me. That was exactly what I'm looking at. My problem is that where my brain goes then is that I end up focusing in on just blue.
Mm-hmm.
Because just blue, it's a very easy to get to that prudence, that careful, the cautious, the considered, that's blue. So I had already started going down this path of, I'll build an Izzet deck that's blue. Okay, blue, but let's take out all of the chaotic aspects of red.
It's gonna be hard to
this
do.
Isn't
yeah
this has stopped being the opposite and started being, look, we've got enemy colors, I just chose one.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, I think like a lot of the Ravnican guilds tend to not generally favor one side over the other, but like the patterns that we see played generally are like, for instance, Izzet is a lot of like spell based, instant sorcery based, burn, etc. So like it generally, again generalizing, tends to on the outside seem more red heavy. I mean, I think flipping that on its head would see more blue. And I think it's interesting because I think with Prismari having come out in Strixhaven, it has kind of lent this idea of creativity to blue and red, which I think retroactively kind of fits into this Izzet theme of like unpredictability and like over the top like experimentation. And if I may add my opinion, I think the opposite would kind of be like structural engineers. Possibly permanent-based walls.
Literally building on the battlefield, building with walls on the battlefield. Is it walls does seem pretty funny. No, I mean, yeah, so it's like that's a direction. Like I was trying to think, like in my head I put Simic and I put Izzet kind of next to each other because they're all about like progress, whereas like Izzet is progress from a tech / spell / like innovation kind of space, where Simic is about like evolution. It's like about the genetics, it's the Darwinism kind of thing, which is interesting. So I see those as kind of like being on a parallel path, which is funny because they both include blue. So for me, it's like if you think about, so like structure is really fun because it's, like it's loose, it's off the chain, like it's like, frantic, is another word that, that's another one that you could kind of gravitate towards there is like, the franticness of things, like what's the opposite of that? But then also the idea of technology and innovation. What's the, is this all like, derpy trolls and giants who, just break stuff or like don't know how to use technology? And it's like, there could be something funny, something more primal there that you could play with in terms of just like that kind of world. Because you do have, I mean, to use Kaldheim, you do have Izzet giants to some extent. So like the idea of building that space out is interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
What about the idea of pirate with a plan? So you've got the chaotic actor, and yet you've created a situation where it's more careful planning. Maybe I'm even thinking of like I don't know, a warrior sniper, where to me that the idea of Izzet is the shotgun blast. It's boom. That's okay. Now what happened? And the sniper would be the inverse of that. So
I like that.
So this is something I've been doing. Actually, I love that. Something I've been doing with these to kind of like help this is a fun exercise because you have to get really into the head of like what it means to be a part of the in this case the Izzet League. And so I actually went to the MTG wiki and I'm reading the background, and it's kind of funny because they're actually, Andy, they're not as opposed to what you were talking about with the engineering, because the Izzet League are charged with attending to Ravnican's civic works, including water supply systems, sewers, heating systems, boilers, and roadways. So it's like they are almost like the city planners, the city engineers of Ravnica, which is kind of funny. But then like some of the things I was keying into just now, in addition to carrying out these functions, the Izzet members, obsessive, keen, and creative individuals who also have short attention spans, I'm pointing to me, are known to perform magical experiments, even with reckless abandon and sometimes with spectacular but severe results.
Ooh.
So there's a lot of really fun like footholds creatively to kind of play in there.
just the guys I want. Managing my plumbing.
my sewer system. The people who want to blow shit up. Literally.
Literally.
Oh, dear.
Took me a second to get that.
But, like, recklessness, reckless abandon.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of where we went initially. Spectacular. So what does a mundane Izzet deck look like? Like, is it like sleep? Like, is it like sleep style effects? Like boring people?
I mean, I once knew a structural engineer, and he was the most boring person I ever met. But
I might try to figure out how to do that. Like, what does a boring day in the life Izzet deck look like? So like sleep. That's the only one that's coming to me right now. Hold on, I'm gonna put.
You have to find yourself a goblin accountant.
There's charmed sleep, which is from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. It basically you can make this into like a untap deck, which is just kind of funny. There's Coma Veil.
of course,
Coma Veil. I don't know what it is, so I'm sure no one knows what it is. Coma Veil is an aura from Shard's Block, and it is a 5-mana aura, so it's blue and 4. Enchant artifact or creature. Enchanted permanent doesn't untap during its controller's untap step.
Oh, okay.
That's it. That's
an expensive way to do that, but sure.
Like I'm just keyed in on sleep right now, but like
same, honestly.
Sigil of Sleep, that's a pretty good one.
Sigil of Sleep is amazing on the right creature.
Right. So boring could just be like if you find cards of like I think about like all the classic Urza block cards, and again we made the joke earlier that it's not this isn't meant to be like themes of like people wearing hats. But like imagine cards where artwork where people just look severely bored, like lectures, that's actually so. There's another angle. So like
the school aspect,
dissertation. Welcome to my TED Talk. Please feel free to fall asleep for the next 50 minutes. So that's.
I love TED Talks.
I actually, I mean, I do too, but like, just commit to the bit. I would say.
Yeah. TED Talks are boring.
TED Talks boring. I like them, but they're boring. Man. But even just like right now, like you could see like we all have our interpretations, and nobody's right, nobody's wrong. There's no
the NPR of Izzet.
I kind of dig that. Like, it's like what's the equivalent of elevator music? Like, what's the equivalent of Muzak in Commander? But that's so. Like, here's actually that just made me think of another one. So Izzet's all about. It's like it's big, it's bright. What if it's subtle? What if it's like under the radar? What if it's secretive? Like what if it's there's a so blue and red, you definitely have options if you wanted to make like where you have the big fiery explosions like of Izzet, and you wanted to dial that down to like the subtle like minutiae of being the opposite. Like there's you could probably go to a lot of more demure blue cards in that world.
Demure, or like even from like conspiracy sets. I mean those mono blue cards are.
Oh my god! What about here's a brief for you. What does an Izzet murder mystery look like?
Ooh.
Everybody did it.
I mean, that's spoiler alert. Just Murder on the Orient
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, come on, Poirot would be like, "What the fuck, man?"
Yeah, I had questions that, I mean, we pretty much have answered all of them. Do you have like a self assigned deadline for all of these, or are you just kind of releasing them as you go?
I mean, I'll be honest, like this is more just an exercise for me to build in colors that I have, like I said at the beginning, like I find uninspiring because you tend to go down the same paths all the time. And so, like, you know, like I may or may not make an Izzet deck because I have, like, one of my oldest decks is actually a Nin the Paint Artist deck. And that deck is all about, like, it was my, this is a shout out to 2012 Commander Cast, but like when I was guesting on there, you know, it was the concept of Aikido decks, like using people's momentum and resources against them. So copy spells, you know, copy creatures, you know, all of that stuff. So like, you know, there's like your blatant thieveries in there. There's so many big expensive cards that have just been utterly replaced in more typical decks nowadays. But again, it's a time capsule. I love the thing, and it tends to do silly, stupid things with like your time spirals and stuff. It doesn't win via storm, but it can do a lot of stuff on the stack, which is really funny. But that said, like there may not be an opportunity. Like if I stay true to my concept of just not having multiples of colors or color pairs, like the idea of a Izzet murder mystery party is really interesting, but I may not do that solely as a red-blue deck. I may do that as maybe a Jeskai deck, which is another color combination for me that famously is a snooze fest. And I'm sorry to my good friend the Jeskai on Twitter, but yeah, you could put 5 decks up and it would be like it's the same thing, like every time. Not you specifically. I'm not attacking you. So it's like in terms of a deadline, I don't have a set deadline because I'm just building for the color pairs that I don't particularly myself find interesting to build. And so this is just an avenue to build in those colors that I haven't necessarily given much thought to in a long time. That said, I would love to see, you know, how each of us could potentially take our concept of Izzet from this discussion and build a deck and see how different it is. Because again, we're not constrained by we need to have this many ramp spells, we need to have this much removal. Like we're just kind of like, what's our theme and how do we want to build it and make a decent, fun deck out of it as a result. I'm 100% shotgunning the murder mystery party for this because that seems really funny. I'm gonna have a lot of fun with that.
Hell yeah. So to kind of start wrapping things up, other places people might know you. I mean, you've got your second cube. I mean, you had mentioned your vintage cube, but you've also got your
So the Archenemy cube, which I think is
Archenemy cube. That's the word. Yeah.
So I have my powered cube, which is super fun to play with. But then I also have a Archenemy cube, which is all about like that was basically my COVID project. Which, you know, essentially was like, how do I, when we're all able to come back together and play Magic with one another in person, like what's a way that we could dial up the social interaction aspect? And so, you know, building a cube that intentionally has hidden information and almost like a werewolf or mafia style structure to it of like, you know who you're going to be playing with, but you don't know who the bad person is. Like, it's just really fun conceptually.
And I'm sure I know you've talked about this elsewhere. So we'll provide some links in the show notes below if you want to send any over.
For sure.
I mean, again, people can find you pretty much anywhere on the internet as @Andrew Magrini, all one word, right? Anything else you want to shout out or plug?
I don't have really anything else too much to shout out. Like, you know, it's just really just looking forward to hanging out with people, looking forward to hanging out with you guys more, because I tend to travel a lot for Magic, going to events and stuff. I don't compete because I'm terrible at the game. But I just love to hang out and, like, just do crazy things like what we've been talking about this whole time.
Well, it sounds like you've been the perfect first guest for our show.
I will say real quick, if you're not following Andrew on Twitter, you should.
I started a second Twitter account just to follow Andrew.
There you go. Andrew's got something that, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is just about every day. Pack one, pick one.
Oh, yeah. Pack one, pick one's a consistent thing for me. I can't go without a day without at least yelling from the mountaintops to dear friend Gavin of Mishra one time. We're now in the end game because we now have the Brothers War coming next year. So
we got 14 months and counting.
14 months worth of Mishra one time. I still need to get that printed on a T-shirt, of which I will do. Pack one, pick one. So if you're interested in having discussions about like the logic of like where do you go in a cube draft when you have your first pack seated in front of you. That's super fun.
Yeah, it's always fun too because like I know that when I started following you years ago, when I started seeing this, I would always like think to myself like, what would I actually pick? And then I would like read the comments, and be like, oh my god, I don't know how to play Magic.
I made the cube, and I don't know either.
And then I just started saying things, and I'm like, yeah, this seems right, like because it doesn't matter. I guess this week, as of recording, we just had the big announcement for the next year releases. Which of the 7 sets are you most excited for?
I mean, it's totally Kamigawa, right? No, it is 1000% the Brothers War, because for me, like nothing captures Magic to me more than the classic story of the two feuding brothers basically destroying the world.
Yeah.
And I for those that don't know, I collect a fair amount of original Magic art, and I'm kind of known for the key theme that I have with my a lot of my collection, which is I call it bots and baubles, because I love artifacts, I love artifice, and so collecting sketches of online versions or tournament versions of like the Moxen, having various robots and stuff like that, like Solemn Simulacrum. There's just such cool aspects to it, and so seeing that get announced, I mean, first off, I've never gotten so many notifications so quickly about Mishra one time as I did when I was not looking at the internet, and suddenly I have the gamut of people saying, oh, it is Andrew's time. And like, that was exciting. But then also just from my perspective, memes and shit posting aside, like being able to live into that story again, more specifically. And we're also, before that, we're actually going back to Dominaria, I guess in the modern day, because there's another Dominaria set as well, which is cool.
I'm excited. Magic's a great game.
Still make way too much of this shit for me to keep up, though, man. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I was gonna say, if you're collecting art pieces relating to bits and baubles, and there's a Brothers War set coming out, Andrew, save your money.
Which, yeah, we haven't discussed here. Obviously, is kind of an impossibility right now because I just bought an apartment here in Manhattan, so. I actually hate money, so I like to get rid of it as quickly as possible.
Don't we all? And with that, I mean, we'd love to have you back at some point. I'm sure
you can't get rid of me. I live in Bruce's basement. I thought we joked about this at the begining,
and we did this over a Zoom call.
Service is great down here. I don't know what you're talking about.
Amazing. So I think that's going to be it for us today. Thank you all for listening. Up next is our Temple's Treasures episode. Find out what we talk about then. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And I'm Andrew.
Have a great night. May your fifth land be the temple.
Mishra one time.
Hey everyone, Andy here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Temple of the False Pod. Just a few housekeeping things here at the end of the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe and give us a review. It really helps out the show. And it'll show us what you like about our podcast. Also, we've got a Twitter and an Instagram. Our handle is falsepodmtg, all one word. So be sure to follow us. Feel free to reach out to us there or drop us an email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com and tell us your favorite magic-related story. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to you and to Bruce. He's Mana Burned on Twitter, and I'm Andy Weekend on Twitter and Twitch. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the temple.